What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Hello, brave souls. Welcome back to the What Do You Fear podcast. I'm your host, Paul Rondeau, and tonight we have 3 different stories for you, all of varying shapes, sizes, and things like that. So, without further ado, let's just get right into the first story, which is called Bottle.
My damnation came in the form of a bottle. No, not like that. When I was a child, my best friend lived next to a little junkyard. A great place for a kid to hang out. The place was full of mystery and exciting discoveries. And if you found anything nice, nobody minded if you took it. Well, no one but your parents. The only exception was my friend's mom. Most of their bowls and plates came from that junkyard, but I digress. One day, a bunch of us were hanging out there, dismantling a car. Some of us were interested in the parts, but I just thought breaking stuff was great. When we'd gotten the engine strewn everywhere, we set to work on the interior. Under one of the seats was a little glass bottle, full of some green, bubbly liquid. Curiosity trumped hygiene in those days. I uncorked it and sniffed it. The smell was pleasant, minty, and a little floral. One kid, Jackie, dared me to drink it. It was a double dog dare. I had to. The taste was also pleasant, and it warmed me on the way down. My body was filled with a strange, pleasant tingling. Nothing else happened. Not until that night. The first effect was that I couldn't sleep. I haven't needed sleep since. It's alright, though I get a lot done. The second effect came a month later. I started to cough things up. I was playing alone in the woods and hacked up blood. Not just liquid, but chunks as well. Then I was puking. The entirety of my coiled long intestine came snaking up as I sat there quivering, tears on my cheeks, struggling to breathe. I was literally puking my guts out. My mouth seemed to unhinge like a snake's to accommodate my lungs. My heart was on my sleeve. The bloodstain would never have come out if I hadn't abandoned the clothes I was wearing. The police searched frantically for a missing person, but never found a thing. I wasn't empty when I finished, though. New organs built up inside me. I could feel them. I could see them when I closed my eyes. Nameless lumps and spirals springing out of everything. Finally, the third effect. 2 months later, I began to crave exuberant amounts of water. I can't possibly describe the feeling of thirsty skin, but it was a desperate thirst. I left my parents' house one night and walked until I came to a swamp. I moved in. The murky, bug-filled waters feel like home now, as they did all those years ago. I sit under the water, watching the fish and salamanders get eaten by herons, looking at the surface and waiting for my prey. I'm sure you know what the fourth effect was. I'm trying this on the cell phone of my latest victim. She was delicious. She smelled just like fresh lemons.
Can always appreciate when a story tries to do something a little unique. So in this next story, it's called The Boyfriend, and the author has actually left us a note. Boyfriend is a scary urban legend about a young couple who go driving at night and wind up running out of gas in a remote area. This one's probably going to sound a little familiar. I was reading through it and it sounds a lot like an urban legend I've heard a long time ago, so I hope you guys enjoy it. It's called The Boyfriend.
A girl and her boyfriend were driving at night down an isolated country road. As they drove, the sky seemed to get darker and darker. Eventually, they lost their way and found themselves driving through a densely wooded area that neither of them recognized. Suddenly, the car started sputtering and eventually stalled. The boyfriend looked at the gauge and realized that he'd run out of gas. No matter how many times he turned the key, the engine just wouldn't start. The girlfriend began to panic because it was after midnight and they were stuck in the middle of nowhere and couldn't get home. The boyfriend got out of the car and took a look around. They were in a secluded and wooded area. All he could see were trees. There seemed to be no farmhouses for miles around. They were completely alone. The girlfriend was spooked and kept asking the boyfriend to do something. He told her he would have to walk back to the main highway and get help. The boyfriend couldn't see his fiancée and was scared, so he told her not to worry. He would return as fast as he could, but the girl could see the concern in his face. Kissing her goodbye, he told her to roll up the windows and lock the doors. Then he set out walking down the road. The girl watched as her boyfriend got further and further away and finally disappeared into the darkness. Hours passed, and the girl sat shivering in the car, fearful of every shadow she saw and every noise she heard. She began to feel like her boyfriend was never coming back. Suddenly, she heard a loud tapping noise on the roof of the car. Tap, tap, tap. She began to panic, but was too terrified to get out and investigate. She kept trying to peer out the windows, but it was too dark to see anything. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping noise seemed to go on and on. The girl was scared to death, but there was nothing she could do. Tap, tap, tap. She was forced to remain cuddled in the car all night long, listening to the weird tapping sound. Eventually, she managed to fall asleep. When she woke up and looked at her watch, it was 9 a.m. When she tried to look out the car windows, everything was completely black. She couldn't understand what was going on. Suddenly, she heard a car pull up nearby, and it honked 3 times. Then she heard a voice shouting, "This is the police. Is there anyone in that car?" The girl sighed with relief. "Just me," she cried. "My boyfriend left me here alone and never came back." "Okay, stay calm," said the policeman. "Listen to me very carefully. Open the door, get out of the car, and walk towards me. Whatever you do, don't look behind you." The girl obeyed the policeman's orders, even though her hands were shaking and her mind was racing. She opened the car and stepped out. "Now walk towards me," said the policeman, "and don't look behind you." The girl began walking slowly toward the policeman, but suddenly she stopped in her tracks. "Don't look behind you," shouted the policeman. But it was too late. The girl couldn't help herself. She turned around and began screaming in horror. Her boyfriend's body was hanging upside down from a tree branch over the car. His head had been chopped off, and blood was dripping down from his neck, completely covering the car windows.
I don't know why, but this one makes me really think of the urban legend where basically a boy and a girl are in some kind of lover's lane or something like that. And there's a similar thing where basically they're not stuck. They could leave, but what ends up happening is there's a guy that escapes from like an insane asylum, and they have the tapping noise, and there's he's got like a hook arm, and he kills the boyfriend and leaves the girlfriend alive. And that's what that story made me think of, but yeah, I'm getting a little off track. So the next story is going to be called Breath. Is going to be a really short story. It's actually going to count as, it's not even going to count as one of our stories, so it's like a micro pasta or like a really, really short creepypasta short. So now we're going to go into it.
Every time you exhale, a little piece of your soul escapes. Luckily, you almost always inhale quick enough to get it back before anyone else does. Almost. Ever fog up a mirror with your breath? Don't do that.
I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoy like a short but sweet, scary story that like kind of makes you think for a while, and it doesn't give you enough information, but it gives you enough to make inferences of your own. Like a story like that will make you think about something that's just something you wouldn't even think of in like your average day. It's something you've done 100 times probably as a kid. Maybe even now as an adult, I don't know. But yeah, I just love the little creepypasta shorts. But the last story we're gonna finish up on is called Bunnyman Bridge.
Back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area. Population-wise, around 300 or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road. So they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed, and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay in until they are appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into the bus, used to transport them to Lorton. Somewhere during the drive, not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something, and the bus had started to tip, and soon was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured, but managed to escape the bus, and had fled into the night, towards the woods. The next morning, a local police investigation had begun, and they begun rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months, except for 2 people, named Marcus A. Walster and Douglas G. Griffin. During the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, all of them half-eaten and dismembered, every now and then along their search. Finally, they were to find Marcus dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made hammer/knife like a tool, made with a sharp rock and a sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing of it, and didn't care how he died, only that he was apprehended and they no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later on they realized they had named the wrong person the Bunnyman. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding half-dead rabbits every so often while the search went on. Eventually, they were to name Douglas the Bunnyman from now on. Months passed by, and the police gave up on their search. Everybody assumed the Bunnyman was dead by now. If not gone, so they went on with their small town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue and started to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids had gone down to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age in the early 20th century did. Midnight came around within minutes, and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge. Exactly at midnight, a bright light came from the bridge, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead. Throats slashed with that same type of tool that was found next to the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but they were cut up and down their chests, gutted like fish. The Bunnyman then hung both the boys from one end of a bridge, with rope around their necks, hanging from the overpass with their legs dangling in view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way, on the other side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or hear anything from him for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remember the incident that occurred 1 year ago at the bridge. His bridge. The Bunnyman's bridge. That night, 7 teens were left, remaining right before midnight at the bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge while one, Adrian Hatala, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. She was the only one to witness this. A dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight stopped right above the bridge at midnight, then disappeared at the same time that a bright light flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of a terrified screaming coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. Moments later, they were all hung from the end of the bridge, in the same way as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home and refused to tell of what she saw, just spattered words mixed with incoherent mumbling that the people of their town had to put together to come up with their story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teens' murders and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened, with 9 teenagers this time, on a Halloween night once again. Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was far too gone to have a life. So she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows exactly what she died from shock from, but supposedly she had died in her sleep, dreaming of what had happened that dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunnyman had finally gotten her. More murders were to take place, however. Although, after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around, and 6 teenagers go strolling out on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them dead. Same way as all the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was discovered. 1976. The same situation occurs, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since then was in 1987, 12 years ago. Janet Chartelier was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come, and they had gone driving out to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 p.m. at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves, and were to be the only ones who actually withstood the Bunnyman. They had waited around an hour or so it was nearly midnight, when Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of the bushes and screaming. So she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits, and by this stage, she's in total panic. She's almost out on the bridge when the lights get really bright inside. When that happens, her body is halfway outside of the bridge. She sees her skin start tearing at her chest, but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages finally to leave the bridge, completely horrified. She hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she awakens, she discovers that she has been bleeding. She was lucky that the cut had just started and wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. She had been sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction toward the bridge a couple miles down. From then on, the story remains untouched and unmoved.
Thank you all for taking the time to sit and listen to these stories. I have a really good time sitting down and reading these out, and these stories for this week have been really, really, really good. So I wanted to thank all the authors. Unfortunately, most of them are anonymous because the Creepypasta wiki just doesn't happen to have the authors most of the time, but yeah. I hope you guys enjoy the stories and come back next week for more. And always remember to face your fears.